Hello, future James. Hopefully you're not shaking your head. Hopefully you're going, whew, instead of, ah!
Thank you for joining the Escape With Me book club. Escape with me, Sam Reiner.
And me, James Reiner.
Into our most recent read. Come with us as we evade reality and go into detail about a new book. We'll be covering the book from beginning to end, so there will be spoilers. Today we're going to Alternate Los Angeles. Published July 8th, 2008, the Valley-Westside War finds us in an alternate where the Cold War turned hot. No longer a part of the state of California, given that the United States no longer exists, Los Angeles is ruled by several smaller principalities?
Communities.
Kingdoms. Some of them have a king, some of them have a council, geographic areas, political. As the Valley and the West Side, two different places, go to war, will the home timeline have enough time to figure out the breakaway point for this alternate? And more importantly, can they get back home despite the new war heating up?
Because war never changes. That's a Fallout joke.
Background, this is your favorite of the series?
Oh, is it? Yeah, it's up there. I like post-apocalyptic literature.
I think this is the third one you read in the series. Kind of started in the middle, kept going.
Yeah, first one I read was This United States. I think this was the third or fourth. I think the last one I read was In Higher Places. There's that whole line of things. But yeah, this one's good. I like it. I think he does well.
Yeah. Age level, mid-lit, and content warning, animal cruelty, animal death, blood, gore, graphic violence, rape mentioned, and language implied.
Yes. Bit more tame than some of them.
Depends what your triggers are, but yeah.
I guess, yeah. It's more warfare heavy.
Yeah.
Because they fight a small battle.
If you can't handle the dog dying, this is not for you.
Yeah, the dog does die. Off screen or off page, they just say, hey, the dog's died. They don't go in brutal detail about the death.
No, but they talk about what they did and what they're doing and that it hits him. And then technically off screen, they're like, oh yeah, and then he died.
Yeah.
If you can't take the dog dying, this is not for you.
To clarify, for those who haven't read the book, it is a mutant dog, though. He's the size of a horse.
And he's still a dog.
She's like, he's still a puppy.
Mm-hmm. Judge a book by its cover. So the cover you have is an explosion in the background.
Mushroom cloud.
Mushroom cloud, yes. And a girl in black and white for some reason. The rest of the book is in color, but she's black and white, wearing some sort of strange clothing to us and looking at the reader. She looks so exasperated. She is done. She is 100% not about this anymore. And so all I could think was, okay, so the home timeline person is going to be a girl. And she's going to be absolutely done with this nonsense. And then I thought they'd have an explosion somewhere in the book. That doesn't end up happening. But my first one was right, because to go into the characters, Dan is from the alternate timeline, and he's 17. He's from the Valley.
He is from this timeline where nuclear war happened in the 1970s, and over 100 years later, people are still trying to come back from that. And he's part of this sort of downgraded, destroyed, frozen in time 1970s post-apocalyptic America.
Yes. And the other POV we have is Liz.
Yes, she's from our main timeline. And her family's main goal, unlike the other novels, which is focusing on gathering resources, her family's focused on trying to figure out what caused this alternative timeline. Because wouldn't you know it, when you start a nuclear war, it's really hard to get any answers because society has collapsed. Most people don't know who started the war.
Yes. Which is new for the series. I don't think there's ever been a previous when they're trying to figure out what it is. I feel like every time we go in, they're always like, oh, it's this. This is what changed. So this is our first time seeing someone be like, oh, we need to figure out why this one changed. And so her dad, Liz's dad, works for UCLA as a history professor. And her mom, who I don't think gets a name.
I cannot remember.
No, I have Liz and I have Jeff, which is her dad. I don't have her mom's name.
You just always called her mom.
Yeah, she also works for UCLA. I think in some sort of science field. where she would have some expertise and knowledge in warfare, like explosions and stuff like that. Anyway, so it's them two. They got a grant from someone, the government probably, or maybe Crosstime. And so the way a lot of academics work is they get a grant to do a research project. They, of course, have to write up a proposal and be like, this is what I'm going to use the grant money for. And if you reach the end of your goal, they're like, cool, you're going to actually do it so you can get more grant money and you get more renown, so you're able to do better research and such and so forth. If you don't do what the grant says, then you're going to have a harder time getting grant money. And so that is a huge dilemma in this book because the war happens and some other stuff. And so they're like, well, do we have enough? If we left right now, would we be able to say that we did our grant? Or if we left right now, would we be basically throwing it away and, oh, we failed this grant, what our research is?
Yep. So that's the tough little dilemma her family's in. Do we stay or do we go?
Yes.
At the beginning of the novel, of course.
And Liz is also worried because she, internship. She's worried if she bails out of this because of the reasons, which is basically Dan, he's just annoying. Let's just put it that way.
The disabling of society, you also destabilize things like cultural norms and morals and things like that. So by Dan's standards, he's pretty cool. He's a pretty open-minded guy. By Liz's standards, he's a caveman.
Yes.
She's surprised he doesn't hit her over the head with a club and try to drag her off.
And the Cold War took place shortly after World War II. So that's something else to consider. The farthest they progressed...
It's the 70s, because they still have lingo left over.
Yes.
Time kind of stopped, because everyone was barely scraping by for quite a long time, over 100 years. But they still say things like heavy and groovy and stuff, which is hilarious.
Yes. So I don't think people realize how long the Cold War went on because it's in the homogenous past, but it went on for quite some time and didn't stop until the 90s. Almost 50 years of this, of are we going to go to war? Are we not going to go to war? And so in this timeline, all they've progressed philosophically, morally, whatever you want to call it, is the 70s, and then the whole world fell apart. So we've only had the first and second wave of feminism.
Yes, late 60s, early 70s, I think they believe the bombs fell. So that was just right after the civil rights movement. I mean, but the cusp of it, basically snuffing it out because of the bombs falling. Let's be honest, even if the bombs fell today, we'd be facing the same problems of regression.
Oh yeah, there would be a regression. They haven't come as far as we did currently.
That is true. So they had even more of a handicap. So yeah, they had a lot going against them.
Yeah, never in their mind where they're like, oh, modern day morals, that's a thing. And so that's never existed in this world. And then they regressed.
Yes.
So, yeah, I didn't like Dan. Maybe I've just been in Liz's situation, and so I'm like,
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. And something I like about Turtledove, and I was thinking about this the other day, because I'm reading another one of his books, and he does the whole shifting POV thing, and he does all sorts of types of people from different backgrounds, women, men, minorities, white people, good people, bad people, racist, things like that, right? And I was reading one section where it was this really, really terrible guy. He's a police officer. He doesn't think he's a bad guy, of course, but you as the reader watching know he's doing bad things. And that's the thing. Turtledove isn't going to smack you over the head with, this person's a bad person, smack. This person's a bad person, smack. He's given their point of view, and their point of view, they're not going to be like, wait a second, am I a bad person? No, they think they're totally right. And that's kind of Dan's point of view, is he's oblivious to the whole fact that he's backwards and has issues. And I'm glad we get Liz's point of view too, though, because we see her point, and just like you're resonating more with it. You're like, gosh, Dan is an annoying person.
She's just trying to do her job.
I know. But that's what I like about Turtledove, is you're not really supposed to look at Dan and be like, oh, he's so amazing. He's very subtle about his characters, because people's flaws are their flaws. They don't exactly wake up in the morning and be like, I'm a terrible person.
Yes. So what frustrates me about Dan is, and Turtledove does it very well, but he does the thing where first of all, he starts out and he's like, you're okay. And then he's like, well, you're basically the only girl I hang out around, so I'm going to become enamored by you, obsessed with you, totally in love. and then you're not reciprocating, then I hate you and I'm going to work against you to ruin your life. Well, not ruin his, he didn't go that far, but he was kind of helping the army, trying to turn them down and stuff. Oh, but don't worry, as soon as Liz pops up again, oh no, he never meant it for anything bad to happen to her. He's still so in love. Stop. Leave her alone.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. I think you summed it up well. It's now making me think of the relationship from In Higher Places.
Yes, I did think about that between those two.
Yeah, because their relationship would have issues. And it's just the same thing here is there's no way Liz would be interested in Dan because he's from a timeline where it's just so different. He thinks differently. And I'm thinking back to that. I was like, we never really get the end of that story, but it makes me seriously wonder if they would have been fine as a couple. Probably not.
Yeah.
Or friends, because it's a struggle.
And Jacques from that book was even more backwards than Dan, technology wise.
Well, mentality too. He was pretty racist until she helped him a little.
He was, but here's the difference between him and Dan. When Jacques was faced with a situation where he could potentially rethink his world views, he did it.
Yes.
When and I can't remember her name at this point, but when the female protagonist was like, hey, have you ever thought about how the Jewish feel when you throw rocks at them? And he goes, I've never thought about that. And so there's some little hope there that he has obvious, and we both said they probably wouldn't work out as a relationship, but I could see him finding his place in the society still somewhere because he was willing to think outside of himself, and he did have compassion and empathy that was being awakened in him throughout the book. And granted, he was lucky that he had certain things where he got to see the same thing as like, oh, she must feel explaining stuff to me just like I feel when I'm explaining this to other people. And so he just was very, very good about that. And also he was very, very respectful to her. It was just, I don't know.
It was a good comment. I agree where Dan, he's just too slow on the uptake. He doesn't adjust very well. He isn't realizing he's a bit dense, if we're being honest.
He has no desire to change. Not that Jacques was out there like, I'm looking to change, but given the situation that they were in, I don't know, he rolled with the punches much better. I think Jacques, even though he had to deal with technology and learned that way more, I think mentally he would be better prepared for the home timeline than Dan.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, no, I could not stop thinking about how Jacques did it better.
And he gets close. Were you thinking the little spoiler on the end because Liz's family gets a little found out and they have to flee twice? They go back because they really don't want to lose that grant money. So they try to come, because it's post-apocalyptic, they come back to the UCL library pretending to be different people. But Dan basically finds out through sheer luck their secret room underneath their place with the Crosstime Traffic vehicle area.
Yeah.
And they are shocked by it. They're like, how in the world do they have this technology?
Because they have lights and electricity and refrigeration and Coke.
And because, of course, Dan alerts the Westside Valley authorities. They come in and they're shocked.
So what ends up happening is they help the home timeline family helps this one guy elude the police because he's spying on them and he gets away. Well, he doesn't get away. He actually ends up dying. But so they have to flee. So the home timeline people flee and so they leave. And then the Westside Valley war people are like, okay, let's tear up through this house. Where did they hide? What's going on here? Weird stuff. And they call in Dan because they're like, okay, you've hung around these people. Maybe you'll learn something. And so Dan ends up finding the sub-basement.
Yeah, what happens is he remembers the Lord of the Rings book because they still have books around.
Which I was so mad at them.
I remember you being mad about this. Yeah, they made the voice-activated password to access the room based off that scene from Lord of the Rings where speak, friend, and enter. And Dan's like, oh, I remember the Elvish word for friend, and he says it, and it opens the door to all of Crosstime Traffic secrets. Granted, though, because it's post-apocalyptic, they're not exactly sure what to do with it all. They're just kind of blown away by it.
Yeah, they're just happy to sit in a room with AC and lights and drink a Coke.
But one of my favorite parts that still sticks out to me is they call a scientist of the time. And the guy's wearing a tie because that's the sign of being a scientist. That's right at the end of it. And the guy's like, oh, this is amazing and stuff. And he's their highest expert.
Yes. And so he has an idea of what's going on because no one else has any idea how this is going on. But he's just stumped. He's like, there's no way these tiny, because they find the generator, and they're like, there's no way this tiny generator can do all of this stuff. It's just impossible. And yeah, that's fair. Imagine what we can do with microchips now, let alone whatever technology they had at that point.
That's true, in the early 1970s.
Well, I mean, the home timeline. The home timeline is past us.
Oh, yeah, that's true. So they'd have super advanced compared to a post-apocalyptic world that only knew up to 1970s technology. It's quite a divide. It'd be like magic to them.
A little bit, yeah, and they kind of are like, this is a little bit magic. And so they also end up finding the computer room, which apparently is a separate room that we learn about. But yeah, maybe it's just because everything Dan does annoys me. The sergeant is like, hey, if you figure this out, I'm going to promote you to sergeant right now. And so Dan figures it out and he gets the promotion to sergeant. First of all, I hate people who put people in leadership positions because they have other skills that are not leadership.
Fair.
Do you really think Dan would be a good sergeant? No.
Probably not. He's still too young.
A week ago, he was working with a bow and arrow. The lowest of the low. Anyway, but this guy thinks next time he sees Liz, brags about like, oh, I'm sergeant now. When he goes back to being like, no, I would never hurt you ever.
And again, to kind of defend Dan a little bit, I think Turtledove's goal in this is to show the contrast between them. To Dan, being a sergeant is a really big deal.
Oh, that's a huge deal, especially how young he is and undeserving.
Exactly. And females from his reality who probably are digressed in their expectations would probably be swooned by that. Oh my gosh, a sergeant, security, and look how brave and handsome he is. Liz, who's from a developed society, our society looks at it and says, that's pathetic. What in the world would I be impressed by that? I go back home to a place that has electricity and people who are way more competent than you.
Yeah, their society isn't centered around war. Because I think back, if you imagined revolutionary times, being an officer in the military, big deal.
Big deal, yes.
You have security, you have income, you probably have property, you rub shoulders with important politicians, probably. Big deal.
I think it's also the bigger picture that Turtledove has done with all of these Crosstime books, which really, each alternate reality is more also, again, when Turtledove, I feel, writes his alternative histories, he's basing it on real examples. And every time these alternative universes are like a different country, where the main timeline is Turtledove's main readership, which is an American audience. And what this is showing here is that in Dan's world, that's pretty important. Hey, I'm a sergeant in the Westside Valley Army. That's pretty big deal. Aren't you impressed?
Being in the military is one of the most important jobs you could have.
Exactly. So could you imagine someone from North Korea, totally backwards, just became a sergeant in the North Korean army and then turns to an American girl and says, aren't you impressed by this? And the American girl's like, ooh. That's what Turtledove's showing.
I am less impressed.
That's the kind of the real world example Turtledove's showing. Really, this post-apocalyptic America is like a country like North Korea, where everything's backwards and downgraded, and you got this poor North Korean soldier trying to woo this American college student, basically. That's Liz and Dan's dynamic right now.
Yeah.
So, of course, he thinks, oh, I'm going to boast I'm a sergeant, and Liz is like, that's pathetic. I want nothing to do with you.
And it helps. It's not her country. But that's the thing. Oh, okay, here's what gets me. Their city gets occupied by Valley because this whole thing starts over a stupid wall over the interstate. And they're like, well, fine, war. And so Westside thinks they're so great and wonderful. They have this dog. They're going to do whatever. But the Valley found a machine gun. And so they are able to get ahead of the game thanks to old technology that they found. So luck. And they are currently occupying the city that Liz's family are in. And so that's what gets me a little bit, where you're not being self-reflective at all. You are occupying their city. You are still basically the enemy, but the normal people aren't going to do anything because they need to live.
Exactly, yeah.
And you're going to come up and brag and be like, hey, I just got higher in the military that's occupying you.
That is true. So basically what you're pointing out is Dan is thick even for his world.
Not a moment to think, oh, maybe they won't like us.
Oh, maybe she hates my guts because I'm an occupying army, huh?
It's bad.
Yeah. Dan's not the the higher up. But again, I don't think Turtledove meant him to be. Really, the focus was on Liz, of course.
I feel like Dan was there. I mean, yeah, he was there for finding the sub-basement and annoying Liz. But I feel like he was just there so Turtledove can explain how old military stuff works.
Basically, yeah.
Because we get chapters of him training to use a gun.
Well, that's the big thing, is especially in sci-fi, the world is a character, and the audience isn't interested in Dan. Dan is a gateway to look at the world. If we had Dan's chapters left out, we would not have a clear picture of what this post-apocalyptic American future would look like. So Dan is just a toleration so we can learn more about, as you say, the war that happens between these two post-apocalyptic tribes.
That being said, there's another book we read with one of my other co-stars, the Temeraire series, the one where what if it's Napoleonic Wars but dragons?
Oh, yes.
And the second section is all about training and how dragon formations work and this, that, and the other thing, where it's like, cool, I'm glad I read it once, but if I read this book again, I would skip it because it's boring.
Yeah, a lot of people say that the world being another character is both a boon and a detriment to the sci-fi genre, because one of the faux pas of writing is don't exposition dump. But the problem is sci-fi writers know most people who are reading this book want to be overwhelmed with the background. Why does this world exist? How does it function? I want to know the fantasy, right? And the problem with that is if you're not into it, just like that dragon book, which me and you aren't as into it, we would hate that exposition dump of why things function the way they do.
And so I'm a little sad because this is the first, and he's done war before in this series.
It's true. The Disunited States is a good one. Gunpowder Empire is another one.
Yeah, that's a siege. And then even Jock in the beginning had a little bit.
It's true.
In high places and stuff. I've never been bored with those before. This one was boring.
You were bored? Okay, see, that is a because when I read this, I loved him going into description. I loved Dan going on about how they use guns and how the ammo they use for old guns is unreliable. They're more accurate and fire faster, but because the rounds are so old, they'll explode at any moment. So Dan will describe in battle how suddenly you see this explosion out in the field, and it's because one of the old pre-bomb guns exploded because the ammo's bad. So what's more reliable is going back to muskets and bows and arrows, and he goes into description on how they use those. And I'm like, oh, that's so interesting, but you were bored out of your mind, huh?
No, I liked all the scenes you just described.
Okay.
The training montages.
Oh, I'm used to it. Turtledove does that in like all his horror books.
I just...
It's an acquired taste, because I mentioned before that YouTuber, right, that talks about Turtledove, Alternative History Hub.
That thinks he's boring?
Yeah, he kind of calls Turtledove out because he's got sort of a realistic grind to his novels where it can feel boring. And I think that's what you're hitting is Turtledove's being accurate. Being a part of a military is boring because it's constant drills and recitation of tasks.
Yeah.
It's not all glory and all the stuff I described previously that you were okay with.
Yeah, I think I just hit my limit with, and maybe it hasn't helped that I don't like Dan.
That's true.
So I was like, where's Liz's chapter?
Fair.
But this is the first time in the series where I felt like, not that I was overdone, I was just a little bored.
That's fair.
So yeah, Liz's family runs away to this southern kingdom where there's another transportation chamber. And they go back that way. But then they decide, no, we need to go back and find out information. We need to do this. And so I thought they were going to wait a week, a month, some length of time before going back because they're probably most wanted. But they were like, nah, they probably already forgot like a day ago. They immediately turned back around to go back.
They probably have a time limit with that grant. They probably can't just twiddle their thumbs.
Maybe, but immediately turn back around, just go to a different area. So there's a couple different markets. And so they were in one market area and now they're in the other market area and they're still going to the UCLA campus which they know that Dan knows that she does that. It was bad. I was so mad at them because immediately.
It probably is and this shows the flaw of Liz. They're like, oh, the stupid cavemen won't realize we came back. They probably discredit them.
Yeah, they're like, oh, they've probably already forgotten about us. And I was like, oh, guys.
And then they spot him again. But they get what they want.
Dan immediately sees Liz coming out.
It's true. But she eventually stumbles upon something good. She stumbles upon an article, right, that shows a change of Russian leadership, and it might have been the Russians, and it's good enough for Liz to be like, I think this will work. Let's get out of here.
We learned something new. This might give us answers. Yes. So her job is to go to UCLA and scan their magazines.
So they can see if there's any differences.
And so they basically enter a digital database for the home timeline. And that is why she's doing it. And so that's what she does. And then one of the magazines, they learned that Molotov,
who was an important Russian politician.
He's not just known for his cocktails.
No, and that's funny. He's known in history for World War II being the negotiator with Germany about the non-aggression pact, basically making a deal that they wouldn't attack each other. The pact that Hitler broke when he invaded Russia in 1941. But yeah, Molotov actually appears in other Turtledove books, but in this one, apparently, instead of being disgraced and not really as important in politics after the war, Molotov sticks around and actually still has influence, I think is what Liz finds, right?
Yes, he was involved in a conference, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. So Molotov got involved with them in this timeline, which he did not do previously. And so they think it's possible
that has something to do with the bombs being traded.
His influenced the Russians to attack, essentially.
Yeah, and that's the great thing. Turtledove doesn't really give us the answer. He just basically says they might be onto something, and that's it.
They got to get out of there.
Yeah. So again, the plot itself, when you put it in bare bones, how Liz is there, Dan's army invades, they get to know each other a little bit. They basically are about to get found out, not for Crosstime, of course, but for being accused of something shady. They leave, they invade their home, find the weird basement room. Liz and her family tries to come back into the community via another route. They find something interesting, they get discovered again and have to flee, and that's it. That's the plot, basically.
Yep. It's honestly one of the shorter plots, I feel like.
It is. It is short, and I think it's more Turtledove wanted to show a post-apocalyptic world in one of his Crosstime series. Again, I think the most important character in this is the world.
Yes, I would agree with that.
He just wanted to show what this looks like, which really is kind of all his books, honestly. Really, it's the alternative history genre. I mean, you may have compelling characters or not, but really what draws the audience in, the reason they're there is, I want to see an alternative universe. Please explain it to me. I want to find that fascinating.
Yep. Because that really is it. There's this sort of chase, but not really, because dramatic irony, they're already across the border, and you know that.
Yep.
But they're chasing them down, and they're like, oh no, maybe one day we'll find them. And you're like, nope.
Nope, they'll never come back again. They're gone.
That is not a thing happening now.
And he doesn't even really leave it, because usually that's what you could be tempted in a post-apocalyptic novel is leave them with hope, or things could change. He does that with other ones, like the Disunited States.
In High Places?
Yeah, In High Places. All these other ones, he has sort of, there could be hope. Things could change. In the post-apocalyptic world, he's like, nope. They just leave. Dad's like, that's pretty interesting. The last paragraph of the book just sums it up best. You want me to read that?
Sure.
So apparently Liz is talking to her dad, and she says, I got away. We got away, Liz said. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't neat. What is in this alternative? But we did it. And her dad says, that's what counts. Everybody nodded. The Mendozas would go back to the home timeline soon, and Dan, ... Poor Dan. Liz did feel sorry for him. She wondered what he thought he ought to do now. She was absolutely, positively sure she'd never find out.
Yep.
Oh, that poor little apocalyptic Dan. Oh, well.
I do feel like there is a little bit of hope because it's like, oh, now that we know technology could be better, maybe we'll do better, but
Yeah, I gotta be honest. It's weak sauce, though. I felt like the other books had a lot more hope. That's weak sauce level.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe Turtledove knew this would be the last one. I know we discussed that a little bit, didn't we?
I don't know. We'll talk about it a little bit in a minute, but yeah, I literally thought about Disunited States when he gives the coin and he's like, hey, there's another United States. Because Liz, for whatever reason, Liz is just like, let me tell you all the things. Because she does. He catches her outside of the library and he demands answers and she immediately gives in and is like, oh, there's another world and we are researching here and we could escape to there. Girl.
I think she was overconfident because remember throughout all the other books there was, we can't let the secret out. If other timelines knew about it, they might develop the technology. They might compete with us with Crosstime. And maybe Liz is overconfident. She's like, this is a dirt hole. They don't even have electricity anymore. I don't need to care at all if they know because they're not going to do anything with it. Which is kind of what happens because when they find the room, they're like, this is neat. And they don't know what to do with it.
Yes, but
yeah, it's still careless.
if you can't follow the instructions on an easy, because it really was, he's like, I demand answers. And she's like, okay, here's all the answers.
It always comes back to Crosstime. Stop using children as laborers. They keep screwing things up.
Every single time.
Liz is just like, let me tell you everything. And you're like, Crosstime. You see what happens when you put children in charge.
For real, it's bad. Oh my gosh. And so, yeah, that's where the hope is sort of at. But unlike Disunited States, because in Disunited States, I was like, oh, you messed up. She's going to invent Crosstime Traffic for her timeline. You're done. She's going to go to schools, learn about quantum physics. But this one, I was like, yeah, no, Dan's not going to do crap with that. He's going to tell his like maybe great grandchildren about it.
And that's about it.
If he gets there. But that's about it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Still, my girl. Because that happens several times where Dan confronts her about stuff and she'll just give all the answers immediately. No training whatsoever in resisting.
I really want to know their onboarding training for this company because it apparently sucks.
I'm so curious.
This is what not to do. Don't tell locals about Crosstime Traffic. Last year we had about 500 instances where we told the locals about Crosstime Traffic.
Because you know they can't just be the books we've read.
I mean, it's got to happen more if it's happening this often and just the few books we've read.
What if this was actually like a file?
I know, all the cases that went wrong.
All of the cases where someone gets told about Crosstime.
And the person who's investigating writes at the top, stop hiring children. They keep screwing it up.
But how funny would it be if these were the only events? There are 6 events and all of them are in this file.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh. But yeah, that's kind of it. I don't know. It's really short.
It is. It's short. Again, it's the post-apocalyptic. Which, how many post-apocalyptic novels have you read? I know it's not your forte, your taste.
I mean, I've read a couple.
That's kind of too broad. How many post-nuclear novels or post-entire society collapse and there's only surviving people?
City of Ember.
Yeah, that one would count. That's a good one.
For those qualifications, that might be it.
I was about to say.
I would have to sit down and actually think about it.
I'm trying to think, too, for you. If I've made you read it, I think this is the only one, really. You made me read City of Ember, so...
Yeah, specifically a post-nuclear.
And nuclear's maybe too limited, because it could be like post-pandemic, post-environmental crisis, where society is mostly wiped out and you only have a small group of people trying to claw its way back. City of Ember is a good example. It's a small community.
Most of the ones that I've dealt with, though, are later when society has managed to claw their way back and it's just different or something. It's like a utopia.
That counts.
Then I've read The Giver and the Ugly series.
Giver's a good one. The Ugly series would count too. I agree.
So more than you would think?
Yeah.
But less than your average fan.
That's true. You're not reading the more direct post-apocalyptic. that I like to read.
No, I think literally all of that is all YA, all young adult books.
And that's true. Which Brian Aldiss, very famous science fiction writer and critic, wrote a book called Billion Year Spree, where he talks about post-apocalyptic literature, and he called it the cozy catastrophe. And he pointed out a book in particular where a man is the last man, I believe in England, most of society's gone, and he is having the best time. All the stores are open, he can do whatever he wants. And you see that in some, even one movie I'm thinking of, Dawn of the Dead, where society's collapsed because of zombies, and there's always, in both the original and the remake, a montage of the people in the mall having fun and enjoying life, and they can eat what they want and watch what they want, and society no longer has the constraints it does. And Brian Aldiss is calling this out, saying post-apocalyptic gives you that setting where you can live out your fantasy, right? No more constraints. It's like that show Last Man on Earth I showed you, where you can put bowling balls in the back of your truck and reverse it into a bunch of terrariums, right? You could pee on the floor and no one cares. All these different things. And I think that's why, to go back to the point I was trying to make, you said you only read YA post-apocalyptic, just like dystopians, where it appeals to the young teenager, the young mind, because authority is so bogus. Gosh, I'm showing my age. I hate authority. And this book makes me relate to that. Fight against the authority. Well, post-apocalyptic appeals to YA as well, because it's like, oh, I can live my fantasy. No more rules. No more mom and dad telling me I have to go to bed. No more, I can't get that new iPod. I can do what I want. Instead of just doing what you're told like we've always done, maybe this is an opportunity to discover for myself how I want society to be. It's very, I make the choices now. I'm ready to decide what society will be. That's usually the core of any post-apocalyptic literature, is the society has collapsed. What can I do with that? Because no one wants to read a book where everyone just dies. You want to read the post-apocalyptic book where someone survives, where someone takes a bad situation and turns it to their benefit. That's the appeal of post-apocalyptic. And all the ones you just mentioned, like the City of Ember, that's what they're doing. They're running out of food and the society seems doomed. But these children decide, no, they made a way out. We're going to seize this opportunity and we're not going to just die down here. We're going to figure a way out.
Yes.
Yes. So I think that's the core. And to bring it back to this novel, though, do you think that's in this book, though?
No.
I know, right? Another thing post-apocalyptic could be used for is self-reflection on what it means to be human. Do you think this book does that?
Not specifically human, but what it means to be, human, but it's the advanced versus not advanced society that's also there.
Exactly. Well, and that's the funny thing. We know there's a huge difference between Liz and Dan, but are they both still human?
Yes.
Does Liz have the capability to fall like Dan? Does Dan have the opportunity to rise like Liz?
Or at least, if not Dan, someone else from this time period.
Yeah, maybe Dan's a bad example for that one. But I think that's sometimes what post-apocalyptic does as well. It's not just the fantasy of I can do what I want. It's always a reflection on what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to survive as a human?
Yeah, and given different circumstances.
Yeah.
How your environment shapes you is definitely something that this plays with. All of the books in this series.
It's true. Yeah, it's definitely true. But maybe in a way, and again, I don't know if Turtledove meant this to be the last one, it does capstone everything. This final example of, how much does our surroundings, our timeline affect who we are as people? Because again, it's not really timelines we're dealing with. It's to apply it to our real lives. What do our surroundings do to determine who we are? In some ways, everything. In some ways, nothing. It's always that vague answer, right?
Nature versus nurture.
Exactly. Like being an American, I would be lying if I said growing up in America didn't affect my character. But I wouldn't want to sit there and be like, everything I do is determined by the fact I grew up in America. I like to think I still have free will. And I think it's the same in this. Like Dan is definitely a product of his time, but you even pointed out, hey, there's been other people in other timelines that weren't as stupid as Dan. Dan makes stupid decisions.
Liz's family makes stupider.
They do make some stupid. Again, I think that's Turtledove pointing out, like, they're way too confident. They think they're a bunch of stuck in time, backwards cavemen.
Can't figure anything out ever.
And they almost get caught twice by the cavemen.
You're hubris.
Of all the other timelines, have any of the people found the secret basement on their own? I know in the Gladiator, they chased them into the basement, but all the other places they didn't discover. The cavemen, blown to post-apocalyptic world cavemen, figured it out.
Because of this stupid Lord of the Rings. Here's my thing with that. I'm not mad at Liz about that. It seems like Liz picked the password, is the vibe I'm getting. I'm mad at the parents. You're literally a historian of this time period. Why did you let her pick a book that exists?
Did she pick the password? I thought the password was already determined.
They picked the password for sure. And I felt like the book was hinting at / told us that Liz picked the password. If not, she would have done it with her family or something.
I feel like her dad picked it.
I'm mad at him for that. That's even worse. He is the historian.
Because Liz didn't strike me as a Lord of the Rings fan.
She is. She's like, oh, but you don't have the movies. Oh, wait, you had the books. And I'm just like, yeah, your dad should have known that.
That's fair.
What is your degree in here?
Well, they do have that scene where he points out there's a book that came out before the bombs fell called a Cabatical for a Canticle for Leibowitz. Sorry. It is a famous post-apocalyptic novel about a Catholic monastery, I want to say, preserving technology after the apocalypse. And her dad points out to her, oh, that book exists. You can go to the library in their timeline and check it out.
Yeah.
And I think that was foreshadowing that you should have thought about the Lord of the Rings existing in this universe too.
Historian, grant winner, researcher.
And again, it was their hubris. They thought, oh, they would never figure it out. And they figure out everything. They chased them out of there so quickly.
It's pretty bad. Yeah.
But I think that's the bigger theme, is exposing humanity, our flaws, our virtues.
Even the people we think are the dumbest can outsmart you every once in a while.
That's true. And again, I think it's the whole nature nurture, right? They assume, oh, they grew up in this post-apocalyptic, they're not very smart. And yet they figured it out.
Yeah, they did. Very quickly, I might add.
Yes.
And you are correct. They have not figured it out in other places, supposedly. Although I think this book brings up what happens if we have a split in timeline after Crosstime Traffic was invented.
Yeah.
And the dad's like, oh, well, if that happened, we would know about it. / let's not think about that, basically.
Yeah.
But there is. That's how this works. There literally is a bunch of cross times out there now because timeline.
Yeah, it's pretty much true. Yeah, there was a short story that plays with that I found pretty good, where it talks about divergent points and how every time we have a A-B decision, like, oh, do I stay in tonight or do I go out and have fun, right? Every time we do that, it splits the timeline.
Yep.
And how people will travel the timeline and they come back and they end up meeting themselves because of the split. And one of them went to the wrong timeline and all these different scenarios. But the bigger twist in the short story is there's a detective trying to figure out why all these people are just killing themselves for no apparent reason. And the reason is because people will think things like, oh, should I kill myself or should I not? Oh, that's a funny thought. And they end up creating all these timelines where people just kill themselves randomly. It's a very trippy short story.
The concept of quantum physics and string theory is very disorienting.
Exactly. Basically, the short story is pointing out the contradiction, the paradox, the plot holes of alternative history fiction. How it just gets confusing.
And that was one of the things I thought. It was just literally like, Crosstime Traffic has been around for a while. And so them being like, oh, that probably hasn't happened, that's hubris on y'all's part.
Yeah.
They just don't want to deal with it.
And again, I love it. Post-apocalyptic is really a mirror showing humanity. Liz and her family look down on Dan and this society for being so backwards and slow and stupid and unable to. But really, we look at Liz and her family like, you guys are slow and stupid and not sure what you're handling with. You're not looking beyond your insignificant place.
Yeah. Crosstime just doesn't want to have to think about it. They're like, if we haven't run into it, it doesn't exist.
We know how competent they are.
Literally all of Crosstime is just run by Sam. I'm convinced he is the HR department.
Poor Sam.
Poor Sam.
He was the only competent
agent
Crosstime employee we've met in this series.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
The rest are like, how have we not all died yet?
How have y'all not been caught?
How have the armies of Nazis and communists flooded into our timeline because of how incompetent we are?
It's pretty bad. But that's been my issue since the beginning.
Of course. Well, do you feel bad I made you read the whole series now?
I don't feel bad. I don't feel bad at all. General thoughts? I literally put in my notes to talk about if we hadn't talked up to this point. Dan feels like a worse jock mixed with the parts of Justin from Disunited States that I didn't like.
Has Dan topped the list of characters you didn't like in the series?
He's annoying to me. And not like, oh, there should have been a different POV. I think he was the perfect POV to have as the other narrator. I'm just tired.
I generally liked it. I'm pretty sure this is the only post-apocalyptic story Turtledove has written, because he usually only does alternative history, of course. This just happened to be both.
So my only thing that I would change, and it's only because to keep with consistency with the other books, because the rest of the books ended so hopefully, and because it's a midlit, and I feel like that's what he's doing, I wish he had switched whose paragraph was last. I wish they had done the Liz paragraph where it's like, well, I'm never seeing that dude ever again, and switched it with Dan, who was like, maybe that now that we know about things, we can change things. Because the way it is now, it's like Dan going, I hope we can change things one day. And then Liz going like, no.
Oh, do you want me to read the last paragraph from Dan?
Sure.
Again, Dan could hope so, and he could do more than hope. He could work to make it so. He realized he suddenly had something to do with however much time he had left. He'd never known a feeling like that before. He decided he liked it. So maybe that's the problem, though. I agree with you. Turtledove should have made Dan the last word, not Liz.
Only because it is that mid-lit vibe of we want something good to come out of this, probably. And it's going to end the series, too. And I think that's a great last paragraph to have for the entire series. There are so many characters from the home timeline and in the alternates who have like, I didn't have a purpose before, but now that I've gone through this, I have a purpose. And that's kind of what changes Dan's life, is because up to this point, he's just like, I joined the military because that's what you do. And I just try to get higher up and not die. But now, instead of just having this laissez-faire look at life where it doesn't really matter, he suddenly has something where he's like, I have a passion now. I have something I want to work towards. There is something in this life that I actively want to happen. I have choices I can make to create it. Anyway, so I wish that had been the send-off for the series and not Liz going, well, sucks to suck.
Yeah, I guess that does make sense.
If it was more adult, I could see him being like, well, it does suck to suck, though. So, but because it is this mid-lit, and he does it for all the other books, it just felt a little weird that it was backwards.
Just a little weaker, because it was there. It just wasn't as strong, I think.
Yeah, I think Liz being last kind of weakens it.
And just, I don't know, yeah. Dan is a character. He doesn't change too much.
He doesn't, but the hope is now that he has a purpose and he's just not just sauntering through life listening to everyone tell him what to do, that maybe he'll have some good come out. He'll have a reason to change. He'll have a reason to get better. But you never know. People say they're going to do stuff all the time and then don't, but it's mid-lit, so let's pretend that they do.
Yeah.
One question for the author. Obviously, there is a question of if he knew this was going to be his last book.
Yes, which is what I already told you, yeah.
But I want to know when he knew that this was his last book. Did he know going into this book planning that this was his last book? Was it after he had written it that the publisher was like, this is your last book? Because that would inform so much to me. If he was like, if he knew going in, like, this is my last book, I'm done with the series, or the publisher was like, we're not going to renew your contract after this book or whatever. And so I'm just curious, because at some point someone was like, this is the end. And I want to know when that was.
If I were to take a guess, this is Tor, very well-known sci-fi publishing. They published a buttload of sci-fi stuff, good and bad.
And fantasy.
Yes, and fantasy. So my guess is that Turtledove has something set up with him. I don't know if he had a clear plan for this series. I think he just kept writing books that tied into this until either he didn't want to write anymore or the publisher didn't want any more from him. So I think it was very open-ended to begin with. So I don't know. It's all things only probably he and his publisher know. If he had to write one more to end the series, what alternative would he do? Because he had a pretty good range all over the place, I think, through the Crosstime series. I'd be interested to know, because he's done other ones that don't tie into Crosstime that are one-offs. Because I'm used to his long series. I really enjoy his one-offs. I think they do really well. There's quite a few of them, and I like the range of them. So I'd just be curious what other timeline he would try to link into Crosstime Traffic.
I can say with a hope, I normally would be like, oh, you want to ramp up the tension, so you should definitely do a high-tech timeline and worried about getting caught, except he's done that several times in the series.
The almost caught part?
Yeah, in the high-tech timeline, be careful, we can't let anyone know.
Well, when you said high-tech, I thought tech isn't very, very close to the main timeline.
Yeah.
And how they would deal with that. Because personally, I think that'd be a good end to the series where the whole in the background of what would happen if someone... I felt like all those moments were foreshadowing. It'd be interesting if they find a timeline where the other timeline does discover Crosstime Traffic, and it ends with our main timeline realizing they need to get along with this other timeline and learn to work it out.
See, and this is what I was gonna say. I think that he should do another ancient history. He hasn't really done one since the first book. Another ancient history, and do what I thought they were doing in High Places and finding out there's another Crosstime Traffic.
Yes, I agree. That'd be good. The reason I really like that is because of the implications I've been pointing out in each book, where really this is the real world example that Turtledove is using is, lack of better words, first world countries versus third world countries. And this introduces basically a Cold War situation where two developed timelines run into each other and they have to learn how to navigate off each other.
Yeah, and like you said, it feels like this is being implied throughout all the books. And so it would be a natural lead up. So you think going in, unless you read the back of the book, because the back of the book gives away all the secrets.
Always spoils it, yeah.
But you go in thinking, oh, it's just another timeline. Maybe go to that feudal Japan timeline that was brought up in the first of the book or somewhere else. And you're like, oh, it's going to just be another timeline situation, have to deal with that or whatever. And then at the end of Act 1, they start realizing, hey, there's these other people that are acting suspicious and stuff. Maybe something going on there. Maybe even the POVs being the two sides. I don't know. There's so many things you could do with that. But at the end of Act 1, them realizing, oh crap, there's another one.
Yeah.
We've been saying this since the beginning. This book even foreshadows it, where what if there's a split after Crosstime was invented? And it would have been so good if they met each other.
Yeah, I agree.
Rating, I would give this wooden tires out of 10.
Yeah, I do like that part where they explain having to strip everything off the frame of a car and using it as a wagon.
It gets the job done, but...
That's one of my favorite things about post-apocalyptic literature is the survival aspect. I'm always interested in survival narratives, but trying to adapt and change pre-war stuff into current situation. That's why I like Fallout. Just kind of the goofy things they create and do in that game.
So that's how I feel. Wooden tires out of 10.
I give it a retrospective person out of 10. It's fine. I have read a lot of post-apocalyptic literature, and it's okay. It just seems like a long short story to me. It doesn't really compare to other post-apocalyptic literature I've read, but it's fine for what it is. A YA book that does light post-apocalyptic literature.
Read again. Maybe if I'm like, I want to read the entire series, then maybe, but also it's not a proper ending, so you could skip it and just pretend that The Gladiator is the last book as well. They don't necessarily build on each other, so it's not like you have to.
I was about to say, as I shown, you could read them in any order.
So that's a firm maybe.
I'm same as always.
Would you recommend it to someone else?
If I'm being honest, no. If someone's like, recommend a Turtledove, I'd recommend another Turtledove. If someone's like, recommend a post-apocalyptic, I'd recommend another post-apocalyptic. It's fine. It does what it needs to, but it's not outstanding to me. being either a Turtledove book or a post-apocalyptic book. It exists. I read it. If someone's read other Turtledove, we're like, yeah, go ahead and read that. It's a good one.
Favorite of the series. We have hit the end of the series, so we can rank all the books now. My favorite is still Gunpowder Empire. My second favorite is probably In High Places, then Disunited States, then The Gladiator, and then Curious Notions.
Curious Notions made the bottom of the list, huh?
Well, no, the bottom of the list is this book. All of those, they're like S and A tier, and then you have this one that I'm like D.
Yeah.
So I'm a little sad that this is the bang we went out on.
Yeah, it's fine, yeah, but I would definitely suggest one of the others, like Gunpowder Empire, Disunited States.
It feels a lot like Curious Notions, except I like the intrigue and the character development of Curious Notions better than this one. If you play D&D and prefer the combat, this might be the book for you. But if you play D&D and you like the role play, I think you would like Curious Notions better. That's how I feel about that.
I guess that's true.
What's your favorite?
Oh, it's a tough question. I think Disunited States, it was the first one. I like the concept. Gladiator's up there too. It's not my favorite, but I realize how good Gunpowder Empire is. Of all the ones, if I had to suggest only one out of all of them, it'd probably be Gunpowder Empire. If I had to tell which one's my favorite, it would probably be Disunited States.
But have you read this book? How would you have ended the series? Do you have any book recommendations for us? Tell us all about it in the comments below. If you like the video, hit like, and if you're enjoying yourself, hit subscribe for more. Thank you for exploring the Valley-Westside War with us. Join us next time when we'll be covering Peril at End House by Agatha Christie. I'm Sam Reiner.
And I'm James Reiner.
And we hope to see you and a friend here next time. Escape With Me Book Club is a Lunar Skulk production. Check us out on TikTok or Instagram to keep up to date with us. Lunar_SKULK.